Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the 10 best spiritual books that inspired her life journey is multi-talented consciousness teacher, facilitator, curator, writer, and founder of Magic Source Media, Blue Soul Media, and Soul Alignment Strategies System, Renee Blodgett. A co-curator and producer of TEDx Berkeley, one of the largest and most prestigious TEDx events in the US, Renee has appeared on and in Good Morning America, NPR, the BBC, Wall Street Journal, CNN, CBS News, and countless other media outlets. She's also penned over 5,000 articles in off and online magazines, including Huffington Post, and in her award-winning online travel magazine, We Blog the World, which has over 500,000 reach globally. Renee Blodgett, welcome.
Thanks so much, Sandie. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Thanks for having me.
So with over 500 articles to your credit, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that you wrote your first book at age 10.
Yeah, I guess so. Though that was never published, Sandie.
Have you still got it?
You know, I don't know. I was thinking about that the other day. It's funny that you bring that up. It's got to be somewhere in a crate, right? I would love to dig that up and read it again. So,
well, a 300-page novel, that is quite a feat for a 10-year-old.
I had forgot that I wrote that I forgot that I wrote that on your page, actually.
Was it a good novel?
It was called Life on a Ranch. And it was, you know, I was raised by my grandparents. And so I always wanted tons of brothers and sisters. And of course, it was this imaginary life as a young girl on a ranch with tons of brothers and sisters. So it was not a spiritual novel, but it was fun. It was fun for a 10-year-old.
And good experience for a would-be writer at that age. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you say that you've always had a pen in your hand. Your job as an international marketer took you to over 90 countries, and you were filling notebooks all along the way.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And I still do have those. But today it's obviously, right, it's all typing today. But yeah, I've always, you know, I've just always been close to the pen, so to speak, and did author many things that really never have seen the light of day. They haven't been public, but about all my travels, right? You know, and those early days, none of that is actually public. The only public stuff is the later travels on We Blog the World. So I would say in the last 15 years.
Well, we'll talk about We Blog the World a little later in the show. First, I want to know 90 countries. That's a heck of a lot. What were you doing?
Great question. Well, part of it was being a bohemian, as we all are. You're many of us go that path anyway when we're young, and so that was part of it. And just to explore in my early years, and so much. Yeah, Gesundheit.
Thank you.
Later on, it was business, and I also studied in England for a while in college, and then also in Amsterdam, which I loved. I sold art over there. I was a foreign exchange student in South Africa. Lived on a kibbutz for a while, which was tons of fun. Picked green gages in New Zealand on a farm. Sold ice cream and boat supplies in Australia. So it was pretty random, different things around the world. But I explored, and also it was for business. It was a
And you were
combination.
chronicling your journey all the way, yeah?
Most of the way, yes. As I said, and it's interesting because I hadn't really thought about it until you brought it up, because I haven't talked about those journals that I used to write old fashioned in years. Haven't really even thought about them. And so until you brought it up, it occurred to me that yes, they have never been published. So that's a project for after at least the next 2 books I'm working on.
Yeah, I would say, because in the time that since you've been doing that, the world has changed so much. It will be quite interesting to look back, what the world was like when you were traveling.
Yeah, back in that day, right? I mean, there was no digital anything. And so Lonely Planet was our Bible.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember contributing to it at times throughout the years. But yeah, you're bringing back some really great memories.
And of course, you're an avid reader.
Yes, that's what excited me about your show. I hadn't heard of it. And then, we met through a mutual friend, and I thought, wow, what a great idea. It's an absolutely fabulous idea, because usually I get referrals from other people, and that's what kind of guides me to pick up a book. If someone says, go read this, and I trust that source, right? It's a curation process for all of us. Then I buy the book. It's just, that's how it happens. It lands on the nightstand, and there's usually like 5 or 6 books at any one time going. And so I just thought, wow, I love this concept and I love this idea.
So, how difficult was it for you to cull your list down to just 10?
Oh, you have no idea. I mean, literally, this is just a tiny, downstairs, there's wall-to-wall bookshelves, right? All around, the perimeter. And so, I just put some of my favorites up here, but yeah, very hard to pare down.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because you and I were chatting earlier, and I thought, oh God, the God equation. I haven't read that in a while. Am I going to remember everything that I loved about it? And so that's the thing. I'm going through books so quickly, right? So quickly that, sometimes it's hard to remember what most inspired you.
Yes.
Right. Unbearable Lightness of Being, like back in the day, that was my go-to book, which is not on this list, but a fabulous read. And that was always one of the ones that constantly inspired me. And by constantly, I mean in my 20s and my 30s and my 40s, right? Because sometimes something that we read that's super inspirational at 20 either can be even more profound at 50, right? Because you're reading it at a much deeper level and you understand so much more. Or it doesn't resonate at all anymore.
Yeah.
So those are the gems. Those are the ones that you're trying to prune and figure out, do they have longevity and sustainability and making that impact in your life?
So let's talk about your first book, which is Eye of the Heart, A Spiritual Journey into the Imaginal Realm by Cynthia Bourgeault.
Yes.
I think it was upside down.
Oh.
Or maybe that's... Yeah, it's upside down.
Oh, better?
There we go. So that was published in 2020. So it's obviously a fairly recent read. What was it about this book that you loved so much?
Yeah, she's not new to me. In fact, I've read probably all of her books except for one. And so they're all fabulous. Really, they're all just amazing. I love her work. I think the thing that really moved me about this one is, how like most spiritual teachers talk about these dimensions and these realms and these places that you go to, right? And all of the most profound teachers talk about it as not a place. It's not a place. It's a dimensional reality. It's a different shift in your consciousness. And she calls it the imaginal realm in this particular book. And I just love the places that she took us to to explain it in a way that really bridges that science and spirituality gap, and she's really from the spiritual side. It's not like she needs to do that because of her profession. She shakes things up, right? With many, many spiritual teachers, because she's so bold about her claims. And she's also written a lot about Yeshua and Mary Magdalene too, right? And and her book about Jesus was kind of controversial.
Well, she was an Episcopal priest and a theologian. So how does that, that religious background inform her work with the spiritual, imaginal realm?
That's interesting that you asked that. So let me read, because she covers it all, right? The identity crisis. She covers non-duality. She goes through every single aspect of it. But vibration is something that I've been mesmerized by recently, because vibration is a word that's being used now, right, in modern spiritual circles. And what the heck does it mean, right? I mean, vibration is, right? I'm a musician. When I think of vibration, right, I've got crystal bowls behind this monitor. That's what I think. When I play that, I feel that vibration in my body. So, she writes about how to kind of get into that vibration. It's really moving into a different consciousness, right? And she'll say that the first priority of any wisdom school, right, is aspiring to conscious circle partnership must be to maintain a consistent level of imaginal clarity. Fascinating. She puts those two together, in which something new can actually be tasted. The synergy is itself the new vibration. That's the merging and the blending, right?
Yeah.
The seeing is itself the doing. And all that's really needed, love this, is to hold that vibration for as long as one can, as purely as one can. Then, like water running downhill, it will find its way into the ground. So essentially she's saying, to stay in that level of consciousness enough so that you're shifted into this different vibrational reality that you'll ultimately feel in your body, right?
Yeah.
Because if we need to feel it in our body. If we don't feel it in our body, we're not doing, Paul Brunton could have easily been, any of his books could have easily been on this list too, right? Where he was one of the first that brought spirituality to the West from, Eastern philosophy from India to the West. And he talked about, it's great if you go and sit in an ashram, but unless you come back to the messy here and now and do the work, it's not super helpful to humanity.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of what she's talking about it, right? Like embodying that vibration, and then these little baby shifts that we can take through that awareness brings us to being able to do the work and being able to be grounded in the process.
Well, another person who likes to play a lot in the imaginal realm is the author of your book number 2, The Wizard of Us, Transformational Lessons from Oz by Dr. Jean Houston.
Love her.
Don't we all?
Yeah, don't we all? So we just interviewed her actually for our Blue Soul Summit series. And whoa, what an interview. I mean, I could have gone on. We went an hour and 40 minutes, so we had to cut it back a little bit. But, I had to share a story with her because, we had met before, but it was always brief because I used to see her at the SAND conference. They don't have it anymore, unfortunately. Since COVID, it's all online, and they focus on trauma. But Science and Non-Duality, it used to be in the Bay Area once a year, and I used to show up, and every year Jean spoke, and I would go down to the front and sit on the floor with my camera and just sit like a child listening to her storytelling, because she's such a great storyteller. And I think, I've read all of her books, but not in many, many years, because some of them are quite old, right? But The Wizard of Us, I think the thing that I loved about it so much was I'm age appropriate for the book, right? So anyone who grew up with that story knows all the characters, knows all the phases, knows all the songs. And she essentially does what Joseph Campbell did with The Hero's Journey. She takes, Dorothy is the female hero, though. Something that apparently she used to debate with quietly with Joseph Campbell all the time, right? The Hero's Journey seems to only show men as those heroes.
She's a born storyteller, isn't she? I mean, you could just sit there for hours and listen to her. And she's such a font of knowledge. I mean, she could talk about anything.
Yeah, I love when she just kind of stares up and, she's pondering and, she's thinking and she's waiting for the answers to pour through her, right? I mean, she's just a beautiful channel of incredible information. So absolutely loved it. And it was just a delight to read, right? It was a delight to read. And it also brings up on that hero's journey our shadow self, right? The witch, not just the good witch, but the dark witch, of which Dorothy had in her. We all do.
Yeah.
And that's the point, right? Is not to retreat from it, but to embrace all aspects of ourselves, including that shadow self, that darker self of ours, because unless we embrace it, we don't do the merging and the blending and the deep internal work that we need to do to get to the other side. So it was just such a delight. It was an easy read. It was a delightful read. It was, the other thing too, that I really loved about it is that she brings you into like some exercises too. So she's very practical, right? She does this with some of her courses too, right? That, here's what you can do to step into that character, that archetype of yourself.
Yeah.
That's what I loved. Like at the end of each segment, she would do that. So you could be like, okay, this is uncomfortable and yucky for me, but Jean's going to help me go there so I can embrace it a little deeper and be okay with that messy part of myself.
Yeah, she is indeed a one-off. I don't think there's anyone else quite like her. No. So book number 3 is What is Real? The Unfinished Quest for the Meaning of Quantum Physics by Adam Becker. And that one was published in 2018. It's upside down.
I know, it's funny because it's right side up for me. So I think it's right side up for me. So I'll have to do it upside down on my part. So quantum physics, right? So as I started exploring my path and we were teaching about the Gnostics and, Nag Hammadi library, right? And the Gnostic Gospels, all of which are back there with all the Mary Magdalene and Yeshua books, right? But it was fascinating because as you go through the Gnostics, you start finding overlap with the Vedas and all the Eastern stuff. And it's like, okay, you start going down that rabbit hole and then you keep going. And then finally you end up with science.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, some people start the other way around, but I didn't because I'm no quantum physicist, didn't know anything about quantum physics. And then suddenly I was reading about entanglement and had to understand it. So within a very short period of time, I would say 3 to 6 months, I read about 30 books on quantum physics. And so I loved them all, actually all of them. Some of them were a little bit rougher around the edges, right? If you're a creative type like me and an artist, right? It was hard. It was deep. It was, okay, how many different ways can I learn about the double slit experiment and read it in different ways? What I loved about this one was as you start learning about all the characters from 100+ years ago who are really at the forefront of early quantum physics, you start learning about what they were most known for doing, right? So what he does in this book, not only does he cover all the theories, right, from the beginning to roughly where we are now, but you get their personalities. And so had I read this first, it might have not been as profound. But because I had a glimpse of Niels Bohr before, and Hugh Everett and David Bohm, and suddenly he brought them all to life because he narrated their meetings. So, when I lived in Europe, I loved the whole idea of the salon thing, and I lived with an artist in Amsterdam for a while, went through that Bohemian chapter, and remember that, the days of the salon when all the impressionists got together. That's what the book felt like. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's heady. You're going to go into string theory and everything else, but it's not an easy read, but it's easier than a lot of others that you might pick up. And you get the personality of the visionaries behind all of these theories and what they did, and then how they played together. So, you start imagining and feeling yourself in the living rooms, right? Where Niels Bohr and Einstein are having a conversation and they're arguing with each other over something, and you can feel it, right? So that's what I loved about it. I think that, not only did he bring in the real hardcore science, but, and the other thing too, right? Which is like, nobody wants to talk about that, but the multiple yous and the multiple universes. So he kind of, that, right? He gets into your head, where he talks about, that new universes are being created all the time. And then as a result, there's new us's everywhere all the time, right? Out there. But how do we know what reality we're in? Right. So he takes you down these rabbit holes too, which, the cover is perfect for that, because you're constantly going down this quantum rabbit hole of like, no more. I can't handle it. And then you can't put it down.
Yeah, I love that writers these days, I've read quite a few books that are telling a very kind of academic story, a very heady story, science, medicine, different discoveries, but they do it in a way that they bring in the characters. It reads like fiction, and you really get a feel for the characters, which, makes them very memorable.
Yeah, because otherwise they're just, their names on a page in history.
Yeah.
Right? Who invented what? Yeah. And I think it's really important for people on a spiritual path, particularly if you're doing spiritual work, whether it's a teacher or as a practitioner or whatever, to understand more than just the fundamentals. No one's asking you to become savvy as a quantum physicist, but I think there's some, what's the word I'm looking for? There's some frustration in the world of science that spiritual people are just throwing out language, quantum medicine and quantum energy healing and, quantum necklaces, and without truly understanding it. So I think if we can, we ask scientists to meet us halfway. Well, we need to meet them halfway too.
Yeah.
And do the work to really understand how to bridge this gap in a way that's grounded and intellectually sound.
Very true. So book number 4, Wherever You Go, There You Are, Mindfulness Meditation in Everyday Life by Jon Kabat-Zinn, published in 1994. You say that you've returned to this one again and again and again. Why?
I have, but not in a while. It's funny. I haven't read it in a while, but I think it's his energy. It's not really, I was thinking about that because, we were emailing earlier and I said, oh, Sandie, I'm not sure if I should have put this one, right? I think I said to you, because I haven't read it in a while. But then as I was flipping through it, this morning, I realized that it's really his energy. It's just the way that he simplifies things and brings things back to the core principles of being in the present moment and keeping things simple. Keeping things simple, like, practice as a path, right? The Sufis say that, like every master says that. So it's a reminder. That's what he does. He reminds us about the basics. Be gentle with ourselves. Sit and don't make yourself wrong that you can't sit and meditate for an hour.
Yeah.
Sit for 10 minutes and be gentle with yourself. So that's what I think I love. It's really just energetically, it's not so much the details, but, oh, and here was the other thing I remember when I first started to learn how to meditate, right? And anyone who's gone down this path know, some teachers will adjust you so that your posture, and you're not supposed to slump and slouch and why, right? And so he writes about it here, and I thought it was a beautiful way of putting it. He said, when we describe the sitting posture, the word that feels the most appropriate is dignity, right? I thought, God, did my mother get into this book or something? Sitting down to meditate, our posture talks to us. It makes its own statement. You might say the posture itself is the meditation. If we slump, it reflects low energy, passivity, a lack of clarity. But if we're straight, we are tense, taking too much of an effort, we're trying too hard. So I love that, right? Sit in a way that embodies dignity, and it did remind me of my mother, but, it's basic advice, simple advice, but elegant and gentle, right? Reminding us to also make sure we have a practice. We were, in our Blue Soul Summit series, we also just interviewed Jai Uttal. Uttal, not Uttal. I have to make sure that we get that right. He's always like, I forget to tell people how to pronounce my name correctly. And every single day, he has this practice where he goes to the altar, and Hanuman is, his big energy or deity that speaks to him in his life. And for each of us, it's something else, right? It may not be a deity at all. It might be a tree, but he has a practice. And I loved that. I asked him at the end of the interview, I said, what would you recommend? And he said, easy. Just, he said to sing every day, come up with a chant and just sing for 3 minutes a day, but find something simple that you can do because it's about the practice, which is pretty much what he's saying in the book, right? That if we don't have a practice, we can't just expect that we're going to deepen our spiritual path and not do anything. This is an active thing here. We have to commit to that spiritual path. So I think that's why, when I think about what I had said in that email to you like many months ago now, so I had to reread it, it's really his energy and that soft, gentle way that he teaches and he writes that brings me back.
And sometimes we learn more from that than from anything else.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The undoing.
Yeah. So, book number 5, because we have to move on.
Oh, right. I know.
We have
too excited. I get too excited.
Yeah. I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about some of the things you're doing. Book number 5, When Things Fall Apart, Heart Advice for Difficult Times, Pema Chodron, published in 1996. One of your favorite Buddhist masters.
Oh, just love her. So I have read every single one of her books, and this is an older one. I first read this after going through a divorce many, many years ago, and I do return to it a lot. I have this hardback one here, but I have 3 other versions of it, and they're kind of mangled. I gave a couple away, but I have a paperback one somewhere, that's got tons and tons of notes and pages bent down and whatever. But I think the biggest thing about this is that, and again, this was years ago. So I was young on my spiritual path, right? These were the days of Ken Wilber and Tony Robbins and doing all of those retreats around the world. But, I think for the profound aha, which really isn't, it's very Buddhist, is that you sit with it and you don't retreat. Right? But I didn't know that then. And I've heard it a zillion different times from a zillion different teachers since then, but it's going through the messy, mucky thing because, whenever we try to escape or go around, it never works. So, it's hard advice for difficult times. So I think I think it's a really great book to return to, and it's evergreen, right? Like so many of these are evergreen, but any transition, it doesn't have to be, it's kind of, when I mentioned this to friends over the years, they're like, well, it kind of sounds like a morbid title. Like, why would you want to read this? And it's like, well, it's really not when things fall apart. It's when we're going through a transition and we're in that uncomfortable zone.
Yes. When we're unraveling one thing, getting ready for the next. Yeah, absolutely. Of all of the female Buddhist teachers, she seems to come up the most frequently. Yeah.
She's amazing.
So we're going to take a very short break now. And when we come back, we will look at the last 5 of your 10. And then hopefully we'll have some time to talk about your work. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a few moments.
OMTimes TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting OMTimes Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit Sedgbeer.com. Click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's Sedgbeer.com, Sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. OMTimes Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, OMTimes offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an OMTimes magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on OMTimes TV and broadcasting it across the extensive OMTimes radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. OMTimes. Open yourself to the possibilities.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Renee Blodgett, book number 6, The God Equation, The Quest for a Theory of Everything by Michio Kaku, published in 2021.
Yeah, so this is a fairly recent one of his. And so he was on later in the list of the quantum physics books that I had read. I mean, first of all, for anyone who just wants like a quick down and dirty, it's short, quick, other way around, short and quick. But it's riveting because if you're really wanting to go down the rabbit hole of multi-dimensional realities and parallel universes, he takes you there, and it's fun. It's fun, right? It's not as heady as many of the other books. So, the subhead is The Quest for a Theory of Everything, but that's what I loved most about it, is really getting into the string theory and getting into the multidimensional realities and universes and, new universes being recreated all the time, which of course, Adam Becker, I mean, they all bring it up, right? Because you can't cover this topic and not do it. But, I loved, sometimes we think about time travel. Like if we went back and we changed to reality, what would that mean? And so he gives the example of, well, you could go back and stop Lincoln, right? Abraham Lincoln from being assassinated, but it doesn't change the reality in your current timeline. It only changes it in another parallel reality or timeline. So I love this, right? That's one of the things I've been trying to better understand about the both sides, from the science and the spiritual side. And so he does a really great job of taking you there.
Book number 7, an interesting one, Life of Pi by Jan Martel. Again, this was published 2001, and you say that the movie was nothing like the book.
No, I mean, we hear that a lot, right? Right. But this one was really like, is that the same thing at all? And I think part of it is because, for me, I resonated so much with the character. So, just in simple terms, what I loved about it most was that you've got this little Indian boy at this one moment. I just remember reading it and thinking, oh my God, I'm the female version of this little Indian boy. He's looking up at his elders, and I can't remember because it's so long ago that I last read it, but the priest is there, and he's got 3 or 4 different spiritual masters, and they're all arguing with each other, and his parents are there like, how can he be going to all of these different teachings? He has to pick one, preferably ours, right? That's how we're trained, and we get conditioned in this dogma of our specific religion only. And he's just sitting there. You can just sort of imagine him looking up like at all of these elders and saying, what is wrong with them? Why can't I choose all of them? And he's like, I'm going to continue to learn from all of them. And I just remember, because I was baptized Episcopalian, Methodist, whatever, Catholic, lived on a kibbutz, I don't know, went to a Baptist, summer camp. I mean, did them all, right? And my grandparents all argued with each other. Oh, and my great-grandmother was Lutheran. And she used to drag me out of the Baptist church, 90 years old, throw me in the back of the seat and bring me to the Lutheran church. No great-granddaughter, by the way, no great-granddaughter of mine is going to go to a Baptist church. So I have always felt like the little boy in Life of Pi. So if you suffer from religious dogma trauma, it's a great book.
Yeah, there's wisdom to be found everywhere and from everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So book number 8 is Sophie's World by Justine Garda, 1991. And you say that you've devoured this one 3 times.
Oh my God, it's so good. I nearly majored in philosophy, but I didn't because it wasn't practical. So I decided to major in anthropology until my 3rd year, and then changed. And, so I really wanted to be of the, philosophy, psychology, sociology. That's really where I should have stayed. But I changed majors because, my professor reminded me I wouldn't make any money. This was back. I went to college in London, by the way. So anyway, when I picked this up, I was like, because, I'm working on our first book that I'm co-writing with my partner, and hopefully it'll be out this summer. And we've been trying to figure out what category to put it in. And a friend introduced me to this to say, this is the model that you want. And I said, well, what makes it the model? And she said, well, look at how, she says it's a novel about the history of philosophy. So what we're writing isn't a novel. But what it does is it comes close to what I would call this not new, but lesser known category of visionary literature.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of where visionary literature meets historical fiction. And that's kind of where we're going. And that's what his book is about. It is a novel about the history of philosophers, because he takes you through all of them. That's the brilliant piece of the book. If you missed and forgot everything that you learned in high school or college about philosophy, you can read this as a novel, from the vantage point of a 14-year-old Norwegian girl, I believe, right? Norwegian or Swedish? Norwegian. She's from a Norwegian village. So actually the author is a philosophy professor out of Norway. So he's taking it through the eyes of a 14-year-old. So it's just beautiful. It's so beautiful. I mean, you get into the characters, and anyway, beautiful, a must read. Doesn't matter how old it is. It's amazing.
So here's a book that comes up fairly frequently, and no surprise why it does. Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, published in 1946. What a, as you say, what a visionary. Oh, and what a book.
Yeah, I guess if I'd known it came up so much, I probably wouldn't have chosen it. But how can it not, though? If it's funny. I had only, when did I read it for the first time? 5 years ago, very recently. And a friend said, I cannot believe of all the work that you're doing, teaching about the Gnostics, trying to explore and discover Yeshua's lost years in India, and you haven't read Yogananda. And so I ordered it, and I thought, 500 whatever, 50 pages, you got to be kidding me. And I flew through it. I just flew through it. So, I think it's just a must read. I think part of his honesty of the pain and the trials and the tribulations that he had to go through in dealing with his gurus and how they taught him.
Yeah.
Right. The humility, so much humility. So, it just goes without saying that if you're on a spiritual path and you're going to go through these trials and tribulations, to read it from the perspective of someone who always knew that this was his path, right? And sat by the feet of his gurus day after day after day, looking for the clues and the wisdom that were often hidden in the way that so many spiritual masters teach, right? Mm-hmm. Yeshua taught in parables. His teachers taught in parables, right? It's never that direct advice because they want you to do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great book. I enjoyed reading it and I enjoyed listening to it as well. So the last book, Bend, Not Break, A Life in Two Worlds by Ping Fu, published in 2012.
You may not think of this book as a spiritual book. I mean, it's certainly not categorized that way. I met this woman at Singularity University, which I was part of. And, I don't even know, I might have been covering the event as press or something. And I listened to her talk. And so, I didn't know anything about her history. I mean, she's the CEO of, 3D printing company, right? I had no idea her path. And, we were just there learning about the technology piece of it. And so I met her and I asked if I could, photograph her. And so we had time to get together and have, seafood and Chardonnay and talk and whatever. And this was about the time her book came out. And she gave me a copy. Didn't think anything of it. Had a nice time with her. Went home. Couldn't sleep. I had to read the whole thing. So it's essentially the story of her life, of how she faced tragedy in China during the years when, she was one of the students who wrote about, or you remember when women were, like, if you had a female baby, they were, all that stuff she was bringing out. And so she had to leave, right? She had to leave for her life. So the book is really about wisdom from the East and what she learned, not just from the trauma of growing up in communist China, but from the Eastern wisdom of the bamboo tree and the wisdom from her grandfather, right? The bamboo bends, but it doesn't break. And that's really a beautiful parallel and, for life, right? That we have to flow. And if she didn't flow, she probably would have been dead.
Yeah.
So what the book does is it's, I guess you could say it's a novel. I'm not even sure. Oh, it's interesting. Advanced uncorrected proofs, not for sale. That's how long I've had this thing. Each chapter oscillates. So you're in China when she's a child and she's talking about lessons learned and how to have resilience and flexibility. And it's not unlike, by the way, much of the advice that Holocaust survivors speak about when they're in the camps. Very similar, because she was in a camp and she was separated from her family. So she speaks about that resilience. And then the next chapter is the beginning of her starting her company in the United States. And then it keeps going back. And so it's beautiful because unlike most business books written by men, she takes the wisdom from the East, right, and brings it into, this is what I learned at this phase of the startup, because then it didn't become a startup. Through all the phase of the startups, and I launched tech startups for many years. So for me, as a woman CEO, to learn a different perspective, not the traditional business way, but the mindfulness way, right? The Eastern wisdom. That's what's so brilliant about it. But you'll cry. You can't help but not cry, just to know that someone suffered that much, but then also to be, cheering her on at the end that she made it through. And, oh, wow, was a success story. And much of the wisdom that made the company and made her a success was from, traditional Chinese wisdom, spiritual wisdom.
Yeah. Wow. It sounds like an amazing story. I mean, you wrote in your description that, her life was brutal. She was a child soldier, a factory worker, political prisoner. She was beaten and raped,
Right.
despite being born into a well-educated family. Amazing what some people go through.
Yeah.
And what they can, rise from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a beautiful story. I couldn't put it down. It reminds, it's a reminder of the resilience that as women, right, that no matter what we endure, we can rise from the ashes. And, and so despite the communist control and the brutality, that beautiful, Chinese spiritual wisdom came through still from her grandparents, and her, she was able to still take that wisdom and bring it through to her when she was going through that. And then not only that, but when she gets to the United States, she uses it, and it was controversial. I mean, I launched, I don't know how many tech startups, and, had lots of arguments at times about, not feeling that this was ethical or whatever. And she had to stand up. And she's a little woman too. It's not like, it's not like she's 6'2" from Norway.
Yeah.
So, for her to speak up in a boardroom and bring in that ancient wisdom for business decisions and investment decisions around VCs and so on had to be really difficult and challenging. So anyway, that's why I kind of threw it into the spiritual category, even though technically it's not.
Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a spiritual book. It's an inspirational book. It's a book that, made a big impact on you and has changed you in some way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's your 10 best list. Now, let's talk about you. Although I have to say a little bit, like we were talking about the life of Pi, why can't he learn from everyone? It's why can't we talk about everything that you've done, but you've done too much to be able to talk about it all. Of all the things you've done, I mean, you've created your soul alignment strategies, which set people on a life trajectory filled with purpose, alignment, connection, and passion. You lead mentorship programs, study with spirit workshops, courses, and retreats. You've lived most of your life as a curator and a producer of events. What of all of the things that you've done has made your heart sing the most?
I love that language, make your heart sing, because it's not what was the best or what was the favorite. It's like, what makes your heart sing? Oh, man. I would say certainly listening to women's stories in all of the countries that I've been, like sitting down, whether it's a village, conference room, it doesn't really matter, and hearing their stories. That to me, it's not Zoom, right? I mean, you're holding their hand, you're seeing the sweat on their face, you're hearing their trauma, particularly Africa, right? I was a foreign exchange student in South Africa in 1984. This is pre-apartheid, right? This is, I mean, yeah, this is when apartheid was still baked in the cement of everything. And just, some of the risks that I took there. I used to go into Soweto, and, it was the women who were the strength and the foundation, right, of that country. And then subsequently, when I started traveling and, drove from Cape Town to Malawi and spent time, living in the bush and whatever, I was just astonished at the strength of the women. So, and the same in Asia, really everywhere I've been, although I haven't traveled as much in South America. So that would be one for sure. And then, as a photographer, I have shot many of these faces, right?
Well, you've
And
got all the material you need for a book that needs to be written.
yeah, the first book, though, that, it chose me. I didn't choose it. And everyone assumes that, of course, given my career and background, that I would write about marketing and branding, or, I would write about travel. And, I guess this first book covers aspects of that. But, the first book is Mary Magdalene's life that's coming out this year. So it shows us, my partner and I, and there are aspects, because she traveled, she did travel and lived in Southern Gaul. So yes, travel will come, travel books will come, and pieces of it. But for now, this spiritual path has been taking over my life, and the topics are choosing me. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, a woman's life around the world, I do think there would be a great market for that. So stick it in the back of your mind, bring it out later.
Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely. Because there are many, many books out there written about like how to travel as a woman, how to travel safely as a woman. But, just the perspective of now when I see things happening in the world, Afghanistan, right, and the Ukraine, and you see these things, and that I've sat with these women from these other cultures and heard their stories. It may not have been yesterday or last year, but I think that when we do that, I mean, when I speak at travel conferences, the main topic I talk about is the subhead of our magazine, which is transformative travel. And I always go in there because if I say spiritual travel, I wouldn't get a platform. It's not mainstream enough. So we go under transformative travel. And then I talk about, it's the hero's journey, isn't it? Talk about that if you don't go into it with an intention to transform internally, then it's just another bucket list.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's a really good point. I want to talk before we close about your blog. We Blog the World. What is that about?
Well, it's travel, actually. It is travel. It started out as a traditional blog, and then we started syndicating content from writers from all over the world. And we still do. We're just a little bit more discerning in what we take now, because whereas it used to be more about arts and culture and music and food, now it's, there's a lot more adventure, nature as a healing ingredient, mind body practices are part of it. The name doesn't really reflect the new content. Food and wine is still a big category on it. So it's really more of an online travel magazine, but about transformation and all of the categories that travel touches, of which food, mind, body, adventure, nature is part of. And then, we do content on our spiritual site as well. And that's really a segue to us starting to lead retreats, which will be related to the book, right? We're going to go to the south of France. We're going to go to Israel and Egypt and lead some of these retreats when the book comes out and afterwards, and really talking about the sacredness of the land, because that's what interests me mostly now, right? Who knew? I didn't know about ley lines, right? I mean, I'm learning about all this stuff. And of course it makes sense. If we're all energy and everything's alive, the land has energy and it has memories just as we do. And so there's trauma in all of these lands, and there's sacred experiences that have happened in all of these lands. And we know that when we're on a piece of soil where there was a war or whatever, we can feel it. Those of us who are empathic or whatever can feel it. So I'm very interested in that now. I'm interested in collective consciousness and healing that we can do as a group on some of these sacred parts of the world that need healing. Because, that's going to heal individuals. It's going to heal ancestral stuff that's happening. So I'm super excited about doing that work, because in healing the land and the energy around it, we heal ourselves. And when we heal ourselves, we heal others, right?
Yeah. You seem like the kind of person who is not afraid to try anything. What would you like to do next that you haven't yet done?
Ooh, I think that's true. I really don't. I don't fear much, but I will tell you, should I say this or should I not? I mean, I do have a little fear about the books that we're going to have coming out. And partially it's because rooted in science and tech most of my life. And so is my partner. He's a bilingual speech pathologist, right? And some of the stuff that is going to come out in these books is controversial. And, I read quantum physics for a reason. I want to understand the science, and I want to make sure that all the work and the teachings that we do are rooted in science, including our books, our retreats, and our teachings. And so there's a little bit of like, wow, we need to probably get on stage and talk about the book and do book tours. And so there's a little, not fear, but there's a little hesitation, because, it's not like we're writing about some general spiritual advice, insights, tips, or relaying, a summation of other spiritual visionaries. We're talking about Yeshua and Mary Magdalene, two of the most prominent faces in spiritual history. And so I worry that on one side, the religious people might be like, what are you doing to my Jesus? And on the science side, they'll say, this isn't, how can you say this is a valid, account of history? So I would say what I want to do is move through that in the way that strong women like Ping Fu and others have moved through their fears, and say, you know what, this is my truth. And I think, what I want to do is help other women to be able to speak their truth, right? Without fear, without hesitation, without apology.
Yeah. Well, you said that this project chose you. It chose you for a good reason. So you must have what it takes to be able to get out there, say what you've got to say, and withstand any of the criticism.
Well, I hope you're right, Sandie. I hope you're right.
But just make sure I get a copy of it when it's published. I'd love to read it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. We're hoping, this summer we'll see. We're trying to push it out as quickly as possible, because there's another one coming and another one coming and another one coming. And yeah, as Anthony and I joke with each other, we're not getting any younger. So if we're going to do this book thing, let's get on it.
Yeah. Well, we can do an interview about it.
Oh, that would be great. That would be awesome. That would be awesome.
Well, we're out of time now, Renee. I want to thank you for adding your 10 best list to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. It's been a great pleasure to talk with you and to hear about the books that influenced you. And for everybody out there, for more information about Renee's work, courses, mentoring, retreats, and her forthcoming books, you can visit 3 websites: bluesoulmedia.com, bluesoulearth.com, and weblogtheworld.com. Next time we speak, we're going to talk about the blue soul, because there's a lot in that we haven't yet covered. But Renee, thank you.
Oh, thanks so much, Sandie. It's been such a pleasure.
Good. So that's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Until then, it's goodbye from me and a heartfelt thank you to Renee Blodgett.